Mike, you were recently in Paris.
I was, yes, and I was playing on the Nintendo Switch 2.
Oh, did you not go to the Louvre or
Nope.
maybe the Pompidou Centre, the
Nope.
Eiffel Tower?
I simply played Switch 2 until they removed me physically from the venue. Yes, I played a lot of Switch 2 stuff, and I'm here to tell you 7 unexpected things about the Switch 2 that we weren't expecting, because that's what unexpected means.
Didn't even go down the Champs-Élysées, maybe visit La Durée for some macarons?
I did walk down the Champs-Élysées, but only to get to the venue where the Switch 2 was.
I see.
First unexpected thing about the Switch 2, 120 frames per second, right, is this sort of high frame rate screen that they've put in the Switch 2. I was expecting this to not be really a deal in the first wave of games.
I mean, how many frames can your eyes really see?
This is the eternal debate. Everyone alleges
One?
it's only 24.
One frame
One
per
single
second?
frame. The fact of the matter is 120 frames per second does make a difference because it's to do with
That's
when
so
those
many frames.
are
Sorry, a movie is 24, right?
Correct, yeah.
A high frame rate movie is what, 60?
48.
48?
Yeah, but video games...
And so this is almost three times
Yes.
like that Hobbit movie that looked like a telenovela.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
that's good, is it?
Yes, it is good, Andy, because
Okay.
it feels more responsive. So
Right.
when you do something on the stick, it is translated to the screen more quickly, which makes the game feel more responsive.
I see.
And I think in general, you know, even I'm sure you can see the difference between a 30 frames per second game and a 60 frames per second game, right? Yes?
I was going to claim not to annoy you, but yeah, no, you're right, I can, yeah.
All
I
right.
can.
So anyway, 120 frames per second. When they announced that the Nintendo Switch 2 screen was supportive of this level of frame rate, I sort of assumed it would be, you know, something that would only be a factor, you know, later on in development, or maybe with, you know, smaller games would be able to push things to 120 frames per second. As it happens, Mario Kart World
Yep.
is a game you can play in 120 frames per second. So the launch title
Yep.
is a game that supports these high frame rates, and it looks amazing. So we were playing it in handheld mode and on TV. And on handheld mode, you can run it at 1080p and 120 frames per second, which is a phenomenal experience. It feels so responsive. It feels so just smooth and brilliant in a way that you would hope a Mario Kart game would. And
Right.
it looks great. So yeah, I was impressed by that. Metroid Prime 4 as well. 120 frames per second mode on that. This is something that right out of the gate Nintendo is doing, which is a surprise because I remember in the days before the Nintendo Direct, Digital Foundry, for example, were discussing the rumours that this screen would be 120 frames per second. They were saying
There's no way.
there's no way with
Yeah.
the hardware that is in there, like surely it's not going to be the case. But actually, yeah, it was the case. I think there's some smart stuff going on. There's a custom NVIDIA chip inside the Switch.
Okay.
2, and so there's probably some sort of frame generation and things like that going on, but it feels and looks really, really good.
Do you think this is what's responsible for the reduced battery life of the Switch 2?
It's a possibility, yeah. I think
Is that a fair? Is that a trade-off that you think is worth it?
Yeah, I mean, any sort of upgrade to those screens, whether it's more pixels or whether it's higher frame rates, whether it's HDR, is going to be a power draw basically. So I suspect, yeah, the screen is probably a big factor in how quickly the battery drains. I mean, if you're running a game like Mario Kart World, which is obviously one of the better looking games out there on the console, and you're running it in these high frame rate modes, I think it's probably going to reduce the battery faster than, you know, a less demanding game essentially. I think if you're running Cyberpunk on it, it's probably going to reduce the battery even more.
The thing is white hot and
Yeah,
smoking
exactly, yeah.
and vibrating.
But the point is that I think it will vary depending on what games you're playing. So if you're playing something a bit more graphically straightforward, then I think it will be less of an issue.
Yeah, it's the same with the Steam Deck.
Indeed,
Like, yeah.
indeed. Yeah, you've experienced that with the Steam Deck. Sometimes you get about an hour and 20 minutes if you're playing something really intensive.
Yeah.
But I think the Steam Deck is a real point of comparison here, and a lot of the games you'll be playing on Switch 2 are games that people have sort of gotten used to being able to play portably on the Steam Deck. But I think you've got to bear in mind that this 120 hertz screen is actually a differentiating factor, right? Because you can only do up to 60 frames per second on the Steam Deck, but on this screen you'll be able to double those frame rates, and so it might mean for a better experience playing some of the games you would be playing on Steam Deck.
Yes, unless that rumoured Xbox handheld turns up at some point,
Right.
and eats their lunch.
It could do, yeah, it could do. I wonder I think that's almost nailed on that it's happening. I think the big question for that is going to be the price of that. So the other thing to mention about the screen is
Console wars. Console wars.
handheld console wars. Can you imagine it? Sony are rumoured to be doing stuff as well. Like
Oh, man.
the Portal was rumoured to be a sort of test case
Yeah.
for a new handheld.
Damn, I
So
love a good old-fashioned console war.
it's about
Let's
time
go.
we had one, yeah. The other thing in terms of the screen is it's HDR, but I would say it was a bit of a surprise to me at least that it's not very bright HDR. I think it's almost HDR in kind of name only. I had a look at, there was a scene on Mario Kart where there was like light bouncing off an icy sort of surface, and I was looking at handheld mode, and it was nice, and the colours were great and things like that, but it really wasn't sort of popping out in the way an HDR TV might. But I honestly think that they made the right call. Like, if it was a compromise between the two, I think going for the 120 frames per second is the thing that is going to be the most pleasant in terms of, you know, the feeling of the games and how they look.
I think it's the most noticeable as
exactly,
well.
yeah.
If you're showing it off to people, or if it's being demoed in a store, you know, that's the thing that catches your eye.
Indeed, and I think the fact that the games are made for HDR means you'll still get that benefit. If you plug it into an HDR TV, you'll get the full sort of benefit of that high dynamic range. That was the first unexpected thing. Was I was expecting 120 frames per second to be like a nice to have that might occur in some quite simplistic games later down the line. No, right from the start, Mario Kart World and Metroid Prime 4, two big examples of 120 frames per second games that are playable straight away, playable in handheld mode on that 120 hertz screen, and also on a TV if you have a TV that supports that higher frame rate, which most people don't. I think in a lot of cases with Switch 1, playing in handheld mode felt like a compromise because it was a lower res screen and, you know, it didn't have quite as much power. Actually, I feel like in some cases, maybe with Mario Kart, for example, people's preferred way might be to play it in handheld mode because they have those higher frame rates, if they prioritize that over resolution, which I feel like now in this era of video games, we're sort of hitting a diminishing returns
plateauing.
We're plateauing in terms of visual fidelity, but obviously frame rate is the kind of gift that now keeps on giving. So yeah, that was a really interesting and sort of surprising thing that we learned from the hands-on. The next unexpected thing that I discovered when I played on the Switch 2 was that the mouse mode, which was a kind of almost felt like an afterthought in the Nintendo Direct, is actually like way more pervasive across the library of games than I was expecting. So what we saw, I think, in the Direct, it's fair to say, was a few Mario Party mini games that used the mouse, and a couple of, there was like a golf sort of mini game and thing, which looked like a kind of eShop sort of throwaway type experience. As it happens, the mouse, they are serious about this mouse compatibility, and it is a big deal across a lot of different games. For example, Civ 7, I played Civ 6 on the Switch, and obviously it was a twin stick controller type thing. Civ 7 you can play with the mouse, and it feels like a kind of PC, or much closer to a PC style experience. It's very responsive. It felt like I was sitting playing a PC game, which was wild.
I love the idea of it because I play a lot of point and click adventures, and I play them on Steam Deck, and you have to use that little trackpad
and it's
with
horrible,
your thumb, and it's weirdly haptic and just like hard to use, whereas being able to snap it off and just use it like a mouse is such a genius idea.
It's the haptic thing has that weird sort of furtive vibration thing that it does, and you're never quite sure whether it is actually vibrating or your thumb's experiencing some sort of nerve failure.
Furtive is the word for it. I don't like it. Sneaky and weird.
One of the key things about the mouse, in terms of that kind of play experience, is that Nintendo are very keen that we try it on our knees, because
I saw that.
They are aware.
So you're just there like rubbing away on your thighs.
Doing the Vic Reeves knee rubbing. Yeah. But no, they would, because what they envisage is you playing a game like Civilization on your TV maybe, but sitting on your sofa just controlling it with your mouse. I do the knee test. Ooh. Yeah, it works on the knee.
Works on the knee, there it is.
Tested.
You say that, although maybe they're building up a sort of bump mapped vision of your thigh, then they're storing all your thigh data.
Yeah.
For whatever, you're just going on there basically scanning your thigh for Nintendo.
Yeah, biometric identity theft.
And they're like, we know what everyone's thighs look like.
We know what your thigh print looks like. Either that, or they're using the static electricity to charge, to improve the battery life.
That would be great if you could you have to wear like polyester trousers.
Yeah, exactly. I can imagine a lot of people using the mouse more than they were expecting, certainly more than I was expecting. Game like Cyberpunk, you can play it like a PC first-person shooter with precision mouse aiming. And then the one that was a real surprise to me was Metroid Prime 4 has its own sort of unique hybrid mouse control system. So obviously you can play it like a twin-stick shooter if you want to play it like a twin-stick shooter. If that's what you're used to, absolutely fine. But it has this sort of hybrid mode where your left hand, I mean you can switch whichever hand is, but your less dominant hand is controlling your movement.
Yeah.
In your other hand, you have the mouse, and you are using it for free aim like you would in a PC first-person shooter. But
Okay.
then it has a lock-on mode, a bit like a sort of Dark Souls, Elden Ring type lock-on, where you lock onto the enemy, and then once you're locked on, you can circle strafe around the enemy, and you have free aim with the mouse. So for enemies, there was a boss we were fighting against which had certain weak points that you had to target. It made it so much easier to lock onto the boss, be moving around, dodging what it was doing, and free aiming and shooting at those weak points with almost like a mouse cursor. It felt so intuitive in a way that I was not expecting, and it was really satisfying. It was almost like a hybrid first-person shooter and like arcade light gun game where you're like shooting at targets.
That is very cool. I mean, I'm used to twin stick
Yes.
movement and aiming. I'm used to WASD and mouse aiming,
Yeah.
but we're talking stick and mouse aiming.
Yes, we are. And
that
with a
hard to-
lock-on and a free aim
Is
thing.
that hard to get your head around?
Honestly, it was way more intuitive than I thought it would be. When I
Okay.
saw people playing it and they explained it to me, I was like, that sounds like it's going to break my brain.
Yeah, right.
But it instantly just makes sense
Okay.
in a way that is so Nintendo. It felt right immediately. So very, very impressed, actually. And I think you'll find a lot more of the games across both third party and first party using the mouse, whereas I thought it was like a kind of jokey, kind of throwaway sort of gimmicky thing. It's actually like going to be a key part of how a lot of people play these Switch games, I think. I will say it's not terribly comfortable the first time you use the mouse. It's not really built for a human hand. It's very, obviously very slim.
Very narrow. Yeah.
And games will use both the trigger and the shoulder button as like left and right click buttons.
Oh, okay.
So it's a little bit awkward, and sometimes you'll have to press the buttons on the side or like switch it and turn it and all this kind of stuff. So it's not entirely without issues, but I think the more streamlined games and the ones that make best use of it, I think you'll get used to how it feels in the hand, and you'll get used to being able to where the buttons fall underneath your thumb in that configuration.
Yeah.
And I think it'll be natural. But Metroid felt natural from the off,
Okay,
which
great.
was quite impressive. And actually, I'm not like the world's biggest Metroid Prime fan. I've not really played the games at all, but it made me more interested to play it because it was a unique control experience and felt intuitive. The next unexpected thing is that Mario Kart World's Knockout Tour mode is extremely stressful. Essentially, this is Mario Kart's kind of battle royale Fortnite moment, I think. So the structure of Knockout Tour is you vote on a route, which is basically a rally route throughout the open world. 24 cars start, and at each checkpoint, 6 cars are removed, basically.
Okay.
Until you've got a final 6 competing for the win.
Right, so it's like an arcade racer where it's like time extension.
Yeah.
Unless if you don't reach the line in time.
Yeah.
Okay, nice.
But what's wild about it is that you'd expect that to be quite a short experience, maybe, because it takes in the sort of entire width of the game map, these routes.
Yeah.
It's like 10 to 12 minutes of extreme focus. And like, how easy it is in a Mario Kart race to go from first to last.
Yeah.
That's the constant thing you're under threat with throughout that thing. And if you end up at last as you cross the checkpoint, or as often happens in Mario Kart, you are inches away from it and you get hit by like 8 different things and everyone breezes past you. That's how it's going to go down, basically.
Well, that was the thing I first thought when I heard it was going to be 24 players. I'm like, that's going to mean there's like 8 blue shells out at any one time?
Yeah.
That's nuts.
It's chaos. It's absolute
Okay.
chaos. And like the way it tends to play out, at least the sessions that we tried, the pack tends to stay quite close together. So you're constantly in the middle of this, and people are drifting and bumping into each other and letting loose power-ups and things.
Do you feel the rubber banding going on?
It's not like obvious in such a way where you're like, oh, I'm getting dragged up towards the pack, or at least how I was playing it. I don't know if I was ever at those extremes but I think just by nature of the distribution of power-ups and stuff, it just keeps everyone pretty close.
Yeah.
So I, when they announced it, didn't really understand that it was going to be quite so much sustained focus required. And it's like 12 minutes of just constant frantic Mario Kart, which is it's phenomenally stressful. It's brilliant, and I think it's going to be so popular online. I think people are going to adore it, but it is like, it's a very very stressful experience.
So it's not just circuits anymore.
No, it's like a long point-to-point route. But what's brilliant about it, and Mario Kart World's open world in particular, is that the open world is a continuous space, but it's got very distinctive areas and regions.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of Bowser volcano area, and there's this sort of Donkey Kong construction site type thing with a gigantic robot.
Haunted cinema.
Yeah, haunted cinema. And these are stops that you'll hit on your route to across the map. I think what it reminded me of, and this is a bit of a niche reference perhaps, but do you remember SSX3?
Yes.
Do you remember how it had like individual runs that had a load of character, and one of them was like a city, and one of them was like an avalanche and things like that?
Yeah.
But then when you unlocked the end of the game, you could do a single continuous run from the top of the mountain to the bottom, and you just ended up connecting up all these. It's that sort of vibe where every area feels like distinct and well curated and interesting, but it just happens to be connected via sort of these roads as well.
That's cool, and it sort of transitions between each area
Yep.
in a sort of sympathetic.
Yeah, smooth sort of way, which is impressive given how different those areas are.
Yeah.
Like if you look at something like Forza Horizon 5, like obviously there's like mountain areas and there's beach areas and there's desert areas, but it all feels like of a place. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas the variety of locations in Mario Kart World is as varied as you would expect from a collection of Mario Kart 8
Yeah.
courses, but they just happen to be connected. So it's brilliant. You get a real, and you vote on which route, and you can see on the route which locations you'll be heading through. And it's not just a sort of random GPS route through the world. It will make sure that each route connects various of these themed areas together. It's really, really impressive. I think it's going to become like an enormously popular way to play Mario Kart Online. I think people are going to really, really enjoy, like I said, that sort of almost battle royale type whittling down of the grid. So yeah, very, very impressive. But yeah, I was not ready for quite how stressful it would be. My best result was third, which I was extremely pleased with. But even on the way to that third, there was at least one occasion where I was the very last person to make it through the checkpoint before it cut it off.
Just cuts everyone off.
It's wild. It's absolutely wild. I think people are going to love it.
Did
but
you
also, bring your, heart medication or whatever.
Did you get to play as the cow?
I did not play as the cow, but someone else refused to play as anyone else other than the cow when I was there. I played as the fancy King Boo, the aristocrat King Boo.
Very cool.
He looked amazing. There's some brilliant costumes in there. There's Waluigi has some absolutely killer costumes, which Ellen discovered, including a mariachi guy,
nice.
which fits with the kind of Rose theme,
Sure.
I think.
Yeah.
But also like a Mad Max style sort of
Road warrior.
/ fetish wear Waluigi. So yeah, there's some great costumes in there. And actually, when you're driving around the open world, you collect these like sort of snack bags and stuff, and then you eat the snack bag, and then your costume changes. I'm not sure why, but that's what happens.
Okay. Keep an eye out for that.
One thing I found unexpected was, I guess, what you would describe as the most important upgrade for the two Zelda games, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom.
Yep.
I think during the Direct, it looked like the main thing was this companion app, which
Sure.
I don't know. It's not.
I thought we left companion apps behind us.
This is it,
5 years ago.
It was kind of fun when we had the Fallout 4, Pip-Boy companion app, but no one actually played the game for significant amounts of time with that.
Yeah.
And if you want a walkthrough for that game, you'll be Googling a walkthrough, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what was unexpected for me, having played these games now at the hands-on, was the big upgrade for them is 100% the smoothness of the game, the frame rate, right? So I don't know exactly what frame rate it was running at. I don't think it was 120 frames per second, but it was at least 60. And it wasn't until... So Ellen brought her Switch along with a copy of Breath of the Wild, and we had the game running on Switch 2. And I had not realised quite how choppy and kind of... terry it was until I looked at the Switch 2 version, where it was running like butter. So smooth. And I think that's the sort of bit that I don't think people necessarily realise about the upgrade for the Switch 2 on those two games, is that actually it's to do with the smoothness of the experience, and it really is going to be the best way to experience those classic games. If you haven't played them before, you're in for a real treat, because they just look crisper and much smoother. But what's cool about those upgrades as well is that I think they're quite affordable. Like, I think the Mario Party Jamboree upgrade, because it includes new mini games and the kind of Bowser TV stuff as well, I think that's going to be a slightly more expensive upgrade. But with Zelda games, the upgrade is going to be affordable, or it's actually free with Nintendo Switch Online, which you're probably going to want to have anyway for Mario Kart. So if you've got that, you get that upgrade straight away. So if you already own those games, that's great. If not, hopefully you can find them cheapish these days on Amazon or something like that, or or some other retailer.
Nintendo loves to drop prices of games.
Well, they don't, but at the very least they've been whittled down a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that was the thing that kind of blew me away a bit was I thought, based on the Direct, that it was all about the app and there wasn't really going to be much difference elsewhere. But actually the graphical upgrade, in terms of frame rate at least, was choice, and it looked great on the handheld screen with its sort of smooth frame rates. I will say the only slight downside is I think with the OLED screen in the Switch OLED, and that was what Ellen had brought along, you do get a bit more of that kind of dynamic range, that brighter colours when a load of magic appears or something like that. It did feel a little more muted, but again, I think just the frame rate is worth the price of admission alone, to be honest, because it just, again, felt smoother, more responsive, and much faster loading times as well.
Oh, great.
So you don't have to hang around ages to get into that game world. So yes, I think as a reason to upgrade, I think that is the reason.
Cool.
One thing that I found unexpected, because I feel like in the past Nintendo have always tried to make sure everything's a sort of very curated experience, and they sort of, I think in a way, try and not overwhelm you with options and things like that, is that performance modes are going to be a big factor on Switch 2, right? So we're used to this on Xbox and PlayStation, the idea of picking between a quality mode and a performance mode. That seems to be a key factor across the board on all these Switch 2 titles, even first-party ones like Mario Kart. So, typically I feel like Nintendo have been so careful about creating a curated experience, right? And you play Mario Kart and it will be as Nintendo desires you to play it. Well, actually, now you are going to have a choice between running it at sort of 4K type resolutions on a TV at 60 frames per second, or running it at 1080p, which is obviously a lower resolution, but at that 120 frames per second that we mentioned before. I think that just felt like a bit of a watershed moment for me, the idea that Nintendo, which normally exercises such control over its sort of gameplay experiences and is so careful.
It's like, we'll tell you how to play it.
Exactly, yeah. And I'm sure most of the time they're right, but you are now going to have these kind of options. And I think where those options are really necessary is with something like Cyberpunk, right, which is probably the game that puts that hardware under the most strain, right? So this is a game that you've got to remember was pulled from the PlayStation Store on PS4 because it performed so badly.
Yeah, it's unplayable on PS4.
I have played it on Switch 2. It is not unplayable, right? It is...
put it on the box.
Yeah, put it on the box.
Not unplayable. My channel.
It's not the ideal way to play that game, right? If you have other options, if you have a Series X or a PS5 or a PC, like that is still going to be definitely the best way to play Cyberpunk. But if you're someone who only ever owned a Switch and are now looking at Switch 2, it's a totally acceptable way to play that game. Everything's crammed in there. It is playable at 30 frames per second. The performance modes move that frame rate up to 40 frames per second, which I think will be enough to make it just feel that bit more responsive and that bit more easy to aim and act in combat. But I played a combat segment of that game and I didn't find it too difficult to target enemies and all that kind of thing. So, it's an interesting one. In terms of the performance mode, I think it's 1080p 30 quality mode docked and 1080p 40 frames per second in performance mode docked. Then in handheld mode, it's 1080p 30 in quality mode and 720p 40 in performance mode in handheld mode. Because I guess there's a bit of extra, there's a bit more thermal throttling because it doesn't have that, the fan in the dock that helps move the air and things. So yeah, those are your options, and they are, those are like a suite of different performance and quality modes that you can pick from. But it is playable, crucially. And I think the thing to remember is that I'm sure you can run it on a Steam Deck and things, but I suspect it's been optimized better for Switch 2 because it is a big deal for them to have that game on here. But also, compared to the Steam Deck, this is a much slimmer console. Oh yeah,
lighter as well.
So I think with the Steam Deck, it's portable in the very loosest sense of the word, because if you have a rucksack and you put the Steam Deck in its case,
in its proper case that it comes with,
it's filling the entire rucksack, whereas the Switch 2 is obviously a much smaller device. It's, I guess, comparable in size to a ROG Ally, but that's a much more expensive piece of hardware. Yeah. So I think it comes out quite well as a way to play Cyberpunk on the go specifically. I think it comes out as a really good way to play it, and it's much like, it feels a lot like The Witcher 3 on Switch. It's one of those things where it's almost a miracle that they managed to get it to work. It's definitely not the ideal way to play The Witcher 3, but in a pinch, portably, it's actually totally playable.
It's the best way to play The Witcher 3 on a plane.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
So So yeah, I think that's the same vibe with Cyberpunk, and I feel like Elden Ring is going to feel a bit like Dark Souls on Switch. You know, again, it's a surprise that they managed to squeeze it in. It's going to be a decent way to play that game portably.
With a Pro Controller.
With a Pro Controller, yes, that's true. Yeah, I could not play Dark Souls on the regular.
Not fighting the Elden Beast on those little things. No way. No way, man.
The Nintendo Switch 2 camera had a fairly prominent position in Nintendo Direct.
Sure did.
I think the thing that I found unexpected was kind of how unimportant it seemed, really, for gameplay at least. Right?
I mean, yeah, obviously. It's like the iToy from 2003.
It is exactly like the iToy from 2003.
22 years ago. What are we doing?
I think I expected there to be more, I guess, like AI detection going on and maybe some more sophisticated games, but really I played a lot of there's the expansion to Mario Party Jamboree called Bowser TV, which is it's a sort of TV show run by Bowser, and it is these sort of camera-based games. They're really quite simplistic. Okay. So one of them was us punching blocks, and like the detection was okay, but not amazing. Another one was this sort of Simon Says thing where you're in two teams. One of you's Mario, one of you's Luigi. You're wearing this sort of hat and moustache, and it'll be like, Mario, stand up. Luigi, don't stand up. And it'll be this kind of stand up, sit down thing.
Okay.
But again, it's like really big movements that are easy for the camera to spot.
Yeah.
And then
Welcome back, Kinect Adventures.
Yeah, well, I think it's genuinely like sub-Kinect levels of motion detection. Obviously, the resolution's much higher, but I think in terms of motion detection, it's not as sophisticated as Kinect 2 with its sort of.
I mean, that was like looking at your blood and like monitoring your heart rate and.
Kinect 2 was, yeah.
Dark witch magic.
It's definitely not that sophisticated.
No.
Like, it really doesn't feel like a big new bit of hardware beyond like it's kind of a webcam essentially. And yeah, this last game on Bowser TV, it was literally just shouting, waving your arms around, and making noise. And obviously the microphone's in the console itself; it's not even in the camera. So I was expecting a little more, I would say, from that. What I will say though is that I think where the camera shines and is worthwhile and valid is in the chat stuff that they showed. You know, the idea of that more kind of social style of play where you can see people in little windows at the bottom and you can see what their gameplay is, and it all works it all out with that kind of Zoom meeting type virtual background cutout thing. I think that's the reason to buy the camera. I wouldn't expect there to be any big games that are built purely for the camera. There might be a couple of little eShop games that are sort of specifically for the camera, but I would not expect it to be adopted like in a widespread sense. This is very much an optional accessory, which it didn't feel like when they first, you know, it was like early on in the Nintendo Direct, and they were like, let's talk about this camera, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's actually not as big a deal as the mouse stuff that we were talking about, right?
Yeah, but watch them put like scannable Pokemon cards into the next Pokemon game. And
I mean, they might do that. They could do that. But yeah, I think for the chat stuff, I think as a sort of social way to play, it's that sort of combination of Discord and Zoom meetings. That's great and worthwhile, and you know, I'm sure the camera is overpriced for a webcam. But I think if you do have it, that's the main use case, but certainly not games. I was expecting a bit more from the games. The degree to which I was surprised by how well the mouse stuff worked and how well adopted it was, that's the degree to which I was
the other way for the camera.
Yeah, the other way for the camera. The final unexpected thing, for me at least, was that the hardware itself feels like really robust. So you know how there's a kind of slight plasticky feeling to the original Switch?
Oh yeah.
It feels a little more sturdy, and I was worried about those magnetic connectors.
Magnets, right? Yeah.
The action on there and the sort of connection is actually really strong. So it definitely doesn't feel like it doesn't feel wobbly at all when you're holding it in handheld mode. And
do they like slide into a groove, or do you just literally snap them on?
They slot directly in rather than sliding in.
Okay.
It's good because the removal is this, instead of that horrible little button that you have to press and then try and pull the Joy-Cons out.
Yeah. Which
is awful on the console itself. Even worse on those little, the little plastic adapters to make them more larger for a kind of handheld thing. Horrible action. This one, it's now this really nice smooth little pull tab thing, which all it does is pushes the magnet away, and then it makes it possible to
Yeah.
break the Joy-Cons away. But what when they're actually clipped in, they feel extremely sturdy, like they're not going anywhere at all, which is
That's good.
is really good, because I was a little concerned about that. I think in general the hardware feels really good. As a very general observation, it's obviously a bigger console than the original Switch.
Yeah, screen is bigger.
Yeah, screen's bigger, so that means the Joy-Cons themselves are bigger. But actually, I feel like that makes them easier to use in that kind of one Joy-Con per person, like horizontal. I found them a bit too small, even with the adapters on the original Switch, a bit too small to use comfortably. They're just that bit bigger, and they're a bit easier to use if you've got larger hands, essentially. So that's a plus point. The new adapter with the wrist strap, which Nintendo insisted on me using, even when I was using it as a mouse.
Oh, you had to put it on.
Yeah, I had to put it on as a mouse. I don't know what they thought I was going to do, like do a really big mouse movement and fire it into the TV. But obviously the mouse stuff works through that. It makes it a little easier, I think, to press the sort of shoulder buttons and things like that. They're metal shoulder buttons, and they feel really good. But that's a lot more slimline as well, and seems to connect a lot more easily. Like, they didn't let us do it ourselves, I guess, because they had helpers and stuff. But I think those wrist strap connectors are much better as well. All in all, though, the action is just a lot more pleasant. You know how that when you're slotting a Joy-Con in and out, it's got that kind of like almost sharp edge on the inside of the console itself that's just really unpleasant to deal with. There's none of that. It just kind of clunks together really nicely.
Good. Yeah.
It feels like they've really thought about that stuff and the ergonomics of it and how pleasant it'll be. But somehow they haven't had to compromise the sort of rigidity of the console itself. We had a little look at the Pro Controller. The Pro Controller is essentially unchanged. It has a C button now.
Yep.
And they've said there's going to be backwards compatibility.
You can use the old Switch controllers, the Pro Controllers, on this new Switch.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And so it's almost not surprising that they are very, very similar. I mean, it's a slightly modernised design, but it looks similar.
Yeah. I have no problem with that. It's a good controller.
Yeah, exactly. It feels comfortable. I'm kind of fine with that. The only other thing is that since we went and had the hands-on, it has been revealed that they're not using the Hall effect sensors for the joysticks in the Joy-Cons, which obviously the stick drift thing was a big deal in Switch. I think every Switch owner who's had one from launch has experienced stick drift at some point or other. I'm hoping that there are other ways in which they have mitigated against that stuff, but it's something that is worth mentioning, because I figured it would be nailed on that they would use Hall effect stuff, but I guess the packaging's quite tight in terms of the thing. Maybe there were compromises there that needed to be made, but yeah, overall, that aside, and hopefully it won't be an issue. Hopefully Nintendo have found a solution to that. But that aside, I was pleasantly surprised by how robust it felt, how comfortable everything was in the hand, how well everything slotted together and functioned. So yeah, hardware-wise, I think it's a step up. It feels less toy-like than the original Nintendo Switch. Yeah. And the Switch Lite, which I think was almost purposefully toy-like, felt like it was the Switch you handed to your 4-year-old
like a
cousin or something.
Yeah, an overgrown Game & Watch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But it feels like just a slightly more grown-up bit of hardware, which is nice.
Kind of like the Wii U.
Yeah, Andy, you're right. Andy's convinced this is going to be a Wii U stuff.
I'm just saying. Seemed like a grown-up bit of hardware. Costs an astonishing amount of money. Only has 2 first-party games.
Yeah. Well,
we'll
the
see.
signs are there, I suppose.
We'll see.
I have a little more faith in it than that. But yeah, overall, very, very cool to play the game. Thank you to Nintendo for taking us out there to check it out. And I think it's a great bit of hardware. I think it's one of those things where it's a good job Mario Kart is such a good game, because it's going to have to carry the launch of the console in a way that ordinarily you'd hope for a Mario or a Zelda game.
Yeah.
I know Donkey Kong looks great as well, but I don't know that it's quite. I don't know if Donkey Kong's rehabilitation as a character has quite got him up to the heights of a Mario and a Zelda.
Yeah, they're really trying. They opened the whole Donkey Kong Land at Universal Studios, and they put
he's
going to
get a movie spin-off.
Yeah, but.
Yeah,
and they've redesigned him to be, more cartoony and approachable.
Indeed, I think it'll be probably a very good game, but I think it's kind of coming down to Mario Kart, particularly because it's the bundled game. Yeah, it's coming down to Mario Kart to sell that console. Fortunately, Mario Kart's really good. Everything I've played of it so far is super exciting, and the Knockout Tour mode is amazing and stressful and brilliant and all those things as well. So
Great.
plenty to look forward to. Thank you so much for watching this. Please do subscribe to Outside Xtra for more on Switch 2.
Yeah, there's a live stream from when you were in Paris answering
Yep.
questions from the chat, so there's more covered in that.
Yeah, there's our reaction from the Nintendo Direct if you're interested in that. And Andy and Jane will also be getting their hands on Switch 2 at the London event as well. So
Yes.
all of us will have played it soon. We'll have plenty more to say on Switch 2. So yeah, keep it locked to Outside Xtra. Thanks a lot.
Bye.